Chief Executive, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Taylor. Thank you. Okay. So I hand this over to Blair to talk through the motion. The motion is changed slightly from yesterday, and both the mover and the seconder are happy with the change.
So thank you, Councillor. Sorry, look, I wasn't here for the discussion preceding morning tea. I've literally been working on a proposal to sit behind these recommendations. So I'll explain the three parts of the resolution that I've drafted for your consideration. So, and maybe a bit of context first and foremost. Currently in the city, there is a fuel tax being levied called the Local Authority Petroleum Tax. It's a historical fuel tax that's been in place for a long time.
Excuse me, Blair, could I just interrupt? The Hamilton Press will be taking photos going forward. We've asked them to be responsible with the type of photos they're taking, so if you see them moving around the chamber, you understand who they are and what they're doing. Thank you.
So, Council, there's an existing fuel tax for Hamilton City Council that collects about $1 million per annum in revenue, and that's been.
It's a really good idea that the Hamilton Press is here today to take photos. Any other day I'm fine, but on a day like today when we actually have got really important things to talk about, I don't want to be, you know, have to put my best face on the whole time. No, not like that, but, you know.
It is our custom. Excuse me.
I know,
excuse me,
but it's
excuse
just,
me, Siggy.
Sorry.
It is our custom to let photos be taken, and as long as the chair approves, and it is being live streamed. And equally, this is a very important meeting, and that's why they want to take the photos today.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, back to you, Blair.
Okay.
You're looking sharp, Blair. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Council, as I was saying, there is an existing fuel tax scheme in operation which the Council collects approximately $1 million per year in revenue from, and we budget for that revenue, and that revenue goes to offset general transportation costs in terms of our budgets. That existing fuel tax is levied based on a regional area, so it covers the Waikato with the exception of sort of the Waitomo area to the south, but also includes the Coromandel. And that levy is actually, all councils across New Zealand levy that in their petrol. And we're at the maximum level that can be taken of that existing Local Government Act scheme. And just to help you understand, the amount is 0.6 of a cent plus GST for petrol, and 0.3 of a cent plus GST for diesel is the amount that's been levied. So less than 1 cent on petrol and less than 1 cent per litre on diesel being levied. And that's the existing scheme. And so that scheme is administered by the petrol companies, and they have a total petroleum take across the region that they account for us on a monthly basis. And the allocation of the monies we receive is based on rateable revenue that Hamilton has a proportion to the total rates for the area. So it's the amount of money we get has no relation to the petrol sold in the city. It's based on the rates take of Hamilton versus the rates of other councils. And that is how it's prescribed in the legislation, and that's the scheme that we're under. So just to put that piece of information on the table, what this proposal is talking about is levying a new fuel tax quite separately to the existing Local Authority Petroleum Tax. And if I look to Auckland City Council, and we've clarified and confirmed this with Auckland City Council this morning, Auckland City Council are looking at introducing a new petrol tax of 10 cents per litre plus GST, which equates to 11.5 cents per litre on fuel sold within the Auckland City area. In addition, and quite separate to the existing Local Authority Petroleum Tax I've talked about. So the resolution in front of you today proposes the same intent for Hamilton, that a new fuel tax is sought for Hamilton City only, not for the wider region, at an amount of 10 cents plus GST per litre for all fuel retailed at any service station / fuel depot within the city. And so that would be a Hamilton-only tax payable back to Hamilton City Council. And so the resolution there, there's three parts to it. The first of that is requesting that the government includes Hamilton City Council in a new local fuel tax, as described, and asking the government change the law to permit Hamilton to be part of that new fuel tax scheme, the same as Auckland has requested from the government. And specifically, that's a request of the Minister of Transport and the Minister of Finance, and that to be implemented as soon as practical after the 1st of July 2018. The second part of the resolution is to consult on this proposal as part of the 2018 draft long-term plan. So you talk to the community as part of all the other items in the long-term plan on this proposal. The third element to the recommendation is delegating to His Worship the Mayor and the Chief Executive the ability to conduct all necessary negotiations and discussions with the government departments and the key stakeholders, particularly the fuel companies, as to how we are going to, first of all, legislate for this and then administer and then collect this fuel. Because bearing in mind, the fuel companies don't currently report to us the fuel in Hamilton City, they report to it on a regional basis. So there'll be quite an administrative process required for the fuel companies to place an additional levy on the Hamilton fuel, but not the fuel sold outside of Hamilton. So those, councillors, are the three elements to the resolution. Mayor Andrew, I'm happy to take any questions or clarification to assist in this discussion.
Yeah, my question is around measuring where we are on the scale of the discussion with government and comparing it to where Auckland is. I have this clip from the Herald last week which really suggests that Auckland has already built the 11.5% into its long-term plan. Are they further ahead in progressing this fuel tax through with central government than we are?
Yes, they are, and so our understanding is that the Auckland Council is the only council that's made this request to the government, and so the government are responding to that request. We have been advised that because no other council has made the request, they have not progressed it for anyone else. So hence the reason this opportunity is in front of us today to consider, so that then the Mayor and Richard can make that formal request of the government to urgently see if Hamilton can be added into that legislative process.
So do we join? Do we effectively join the
legislative change process?
The journey that the government's working on, and if so, when do we get a nod so that we can make the appropriate adjustments to our 10-year plan in anticipation of the legislation being passed?
Yep.
I mean, you guys have been talking to central government, so you'll have a better indication than what we have
Yep.
as to where this can best slot in with the journey on this budget that we're considering today.
Yeah, so I'm suggesting we'll have a better understanding whether we can include it in our numbers when we come back to approve the document that goes out for consultation. So which will be in February. I'm
Yes.
thinking early February.
Yep.
That'll be the point when we can make a decision on that. We're hoping my understanding from engagement with Auckland is it was effectively driven very much through from a ministerial to mayoral discussion, very much led by the Minister. The Ministers have a 100-day plan, and part of their program was to address some of the infrastructure funding issues for Auckland. And when they first were elected, they said that the solution for fuel tax would only be for Auckland. One of the advantages of Auckland's approach is Auckland have made it clear that other councils are interested, and effectively the other door's been opened by the Minister by saying they haven't heard from the other councils for us to step into that form. So February we're hoping that we can then bring it back. The challenge we have though is we won't stop at February if we haven't got any indication. We may not bake it into our numbers, but if we have positive intent, we may bake it into our consultation document to consult with the community as one of the options. So we'll work on that in February and make sure that we have the right balance at that point in time.
Oh, you've taken up 2 of my 3 minutes with your response to that question, but just one very quick
I'll ask for permission to extend your time.
question. Are you confident enough, if we pass this motion today, are you confident enough to have staff go back and redo the 10-year plan to incorporate the 10 cent plus GST fuel tax?
Not
as
at this-
Auckland appears to have.
No, the difference with Auckland is the Minister has agreed in public and to Auckland that they will look to change the legislation, so they're working on that legislation change now. They haven't got that agreement here, so that's the difference. So once we get that agreement, we'll include it. At this time, we don't have that agreement, so we won't.
And Councillor Rob, I totally agree with what the Chief Executive is saying there. We've done some very high-level estimates of numbers, and I also note that you emailed to all of the council your thoughts, and I think you had a number of about $8 million that you'd calculated. The challenge, of course, is we don't have the fuel usage figures for Hamilton, so anything we do is an approximation. But to give you an idea of Auckland are predicting approximately $100 to $150 million per annum revenue, per annum. Our numbers sit somewhere in a similar range, in a similar range, 10 to 15,
Would be good if they did.
in approximately a $10 to $15 million range. We've looked at that from a couple of different angles. If you look at our current fuel system, which is 0.6 of a cent of a litre and 0.3 of a cent of a litre for diesel, if you multiply that by a factor of 10, conservatively that takes you to $10 million. But of course we're talking a 10 cents charge, so it would be higher than that. But then you need to think about leakage. You need to think about, does diesel apply at the same rate as petrol? And by leakage, I'm talking about people who drive outside of the city to fuel up. So I think it's safe to say somewhere around $10 million with the amount of revenue, but we don't have enough confidence in those numbers, nor in the framework or the process as to whether Hamilton would be able to join, that we should change our numbers at this stage. But it is a substantial quantum of funding.
Yesterday, Councillor Pascoe, that if we were to achieve, say, $10 million and use that as to fund some of our rating program, that would reduce the rates increase from 15.5% to 9%. So we've done some preliminary modelling, but I'm reluctant to actually suggest that we lock anything in until such time as we have a far greater commitment, and which won't happen until we engage with the Minister directly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Andrew. A couple of questions, because we have only ever touched this at a very high level, and it's dropping in right now at the last minute, and so we're trying to get our head around it. Would the money derived from a petrol tax, the 10 cents, would that be directed to transport-related projects? Is that the?
That's the intention, yes, and certainly in the report that I'm drafting up, we need to do work to obviously identify the candidate expenditure categories that will be applied to. Certainly the current fuel tax scheme just goes to offset the general operating cost of transport. But one would imagine that we could identify specific projects, or you could say a certain portion for this category and this portion for that category. So that work to be done. But suffice to say that our expenditure on transport exceeds considerably the revenue that we would gain.
Oh yes, no, I agree. Transport's a very expensive area. When would we see the details of that, though? Because the devil is in the detail, isn't it? For example, would some of this go to growth-related transport infrastructure, or would it be cycleways for benefiting Hamilton, the rest of Hamilton as well? There's a lot of devil in the detail, isn't there? So I'd like to understand when we would get the very first look at how that might be used.
I'd like to understand that myself. I've literally been working on this for less than 24 hours, so Paula, I think it's something that if Council supported this motion today, we would clearly work on this with some priority.
I appreciate that you've been having this on last minute, the same as us.
Just to add to that, sorry, Councillor Paul, there is precedent in terms of how we spend the current fuel tax, which is very much off our transport budget, so what falls into the Access Hamilton type category.
Yeah.
Yes, but we might have some views on that and reshaping the direction. But anyway, another just final question. Just looking at the recommendation up there, I wonder if there would be still any leeway to put words that suggest that this is a potential rather than an actual. And we're going in, we're looking for ways to raise revenue. We're looking at good proposals, and I think it's very good that you go down to Wellington. Can the words be at least around the potential to levy a tax, not as if it is a fact, if they give us the nod that it'll happen as a fact?
No.
So I don't want to vote against a good idea because we're being railroaded into it.
Well, that's,
for the right reasons.
look, I'm already dealing with government as best I can. I need to know that this council is going to back me should we pull this off. And that's why we're talking about it. Otherwise, we wouldn't have tabled it until after we wrapped the deal up with Auckland, with Wellington.
Just as a comment to help councillors, the second resolution talks about a proposal to levy a fuel tax. So it is a proposal. So whilst it's an affirmative proposal, it is subject to public consultation processes, and of
Yeah,
course,
that's correct.
through that process, you'll hear submissions on that concept, and you'll make a final decision. So it is not a confirmed decision until you confirm the long-term plan by 30th of June. So Councillor Paula.
I do see the word proposal in B. I was just really thinking the C very much kind of says if the government gives us the nod, we're away. That's the way I read it. But I might be just a bit sensitive to the wording.
I think the intention there is we need to contemporaneously work the process. So if this is approved by the government and the council here, following the public consultation process, has a willingness to proceed, we don't want to be left flat-footed, unable to implement it.
Well, I'd like to think that... Oh, no, I'll leave that for debate. Thank you.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you very much. I'm sort of very supportive of this because to me it's a move away from paying for roads based on the value of your property to paying for roads on the basis of using the roads. I'm just concerned that there are other users of the roads, and one of them will be, over time, we'll move, I think what's happening over time, people will move from petrol powered.
Move to your question,
Yeah, I'm
please.
coming to it. And petrol powered to electric cars, or all sorts of other stuff, bikes and whatnot. Is there a way that these things can, particularly the electric vehicles?
Can I respond to that one, Blair? I think it's been flagged by a number of agencies already in AA. I think we've even got a paper on the impact of electric cars. I suggest as electric cars become more prevalent, you probably move to a road user tax similar to diesel anyway, so the tax will probably come from a different direction. I don't think the advancement in technology precludes this conversation at this point in time. It may well erode the revenues we get in the future, and we might need to reflect that, but it also then ensures that we have a robust conversation, and effectively we may raise that point with our engagement with central government as well, but what tools they're putting in place to maintain their excise tax on fuel, because it's the same issue for them as well. So I'm not that concerned about it from our micro level, but I'd be really interested to see how the government's addressing it from a macro level.
Because currently it's immaterial, but I assume it seems to be that there will be some move towards that way.
We could tax at the electric charging point.
Councillor Ange. Sorry, Gary.
And the other way, and this is one of the things that does concern me. How do we make sure that we don't just use this money to reduce our transport funding and then just spend it anyway on something else? I mean, that's considered by... Is there a way it can be pigeonholed and protected that way?
I actually believe that once the legislation is drafted, it will actually affect that, and the decision will be taken out of our hands. Generally, most of these pieces of legislation are quite prescriptive of how taxes must be spent, and I think that will come through that process. So as we progress down this track, we'll find out what the intention is that Auckland's put forward, and we've yet to engage with some of the rules. They're still working on those. But I think there will be central government. We've even been in positions when we've entered into the advanced funding agreement for NZTA for the Ring Road. They put clear restrictions on how we could use the advanced funding money in terms of what it could be used for as well. So the government generally has that notion going through this. But as we form this up, we'll either be told what it is, or we'll have to, as Councillor Paula suggested, actually indicate what we believe it should be, and that should be locked and loaded.
Thank you.
Councillor Ange.
Richard, you said that when the legislation is written, so is there a very definite move and open-mindedness from the government to move down this track?
Yes.
And so how has that come about? What conversations have you had?
So specifically for us, no. Sorry, in general, the government's engaged with Auckland and made very positive. There's been a media statement in terms of the openness to for Auckland and the central government to work together on a petrol tax, and they've made it clear they're starting now the process of working on legislation. But in terms of us particularly, no, we haven't had that conversation yet, and that's effectively what this is going to start us down the process of.
Because isn't that conversation that's been had since the new government has been in place also that the fuel tax is specifically for Auckland because of their unique challenges?
Yes, so the government before they made the announcement out about Auckland, in terms of specifically agreeing to progress down that track, they made a general statement that they're only dealing with Auckland because of their big issues. So you're correct. However, since then, the Minister of Finance has said The reason they haven't proceeded with other councils, no other councils have approached them, so there's an indication of open-mindedness. We have always, in our engagement with central government since this round, pushed the idea of a petrol tax, or we haven't been pushed it back on. Admittedly, we've only been speaking to associate ministers, not the main ministers, so we need to test that.
Wouldn't it be better to have this conversation, certainly with elected members, a more in-depth conversation around the wider issue, which is that all TLAs are facing, which is trying to fund the growing costs of putting in strategic infrastructure for the city? Why have we cherry-picked just this one thing? Are we not going to package it up, talk to other councils, talk to us, talk to other councils, have the conversation about GST, fuel tax, anything else, and then go down there? Why are we just singling this one out?
The indication from the Minister in the press releases, which has also been confirmed by LGNZ, they want this legislation in place by 1 July. And so they want to be in a position to do it by 1 July. So it's raised its profile ahead of all other aspects. There's been no indication from the central government whatsoever about GST on rates in terms of their position there. So we are now looking at this as saying, well, if they're going to push hard on it, one of the things that Mayor Andrew has done is he has spoken to some of the surrounding mayors, and they're having a similar conversation with their councils whether or not they want to join in with the conversation. LGNZ's having the conversation from a New Zealand Inc. perspective. One of the conversations I'd hope when we do engage with the Minister is that we make this an amendment to the legislation that enables all of New Zealand councils to engage with it. And I have no idea what the answer to that will be, but your intent is absolutely correct. We need to make sure that this is actually a solution for New Zealand, because not just growth councils that struggle with infrastructure, it's also the replacement of assets, and so there's aspects to that as well.
Final question. In C of the motion, it says there delegates the Mayor and Chief Executive to conduct any negotiations. What do you think those negotiations are going to be?
So the reason I'm in there to engage with central government, with officers at a bureaucratic level. I'm calling it bureaucratic in the most positive sense of the term, and to engage with the petrol companies and so forth. What we do know is this has very much been led by the minister at the ministerial level, and ministers don't want to deal with bureaucrats. So there's a degree of credibility in engaging with central government ministers with ensuring that the elected wing, which I said before, is engaged as well. And as Andrew is the representative of the elected wing, it's appropriate that he has those conversations.
And I do have half a question left, actually.
I've got half an answer for you too.
Are you expecting this to increase? Are you going down there and saying increase petrol in the region by 10%, or is it clipping the ticket of what's there now? Because petrol's not cheap right now.
No, you're absolutely correct, and that's part of the consideration this council needs to have. You're redistributing the cost. It will be an increase in petrol to the user, so it won't be taking money off the government. It'll be money out of the pockets of the users of petrol.
And we're confident that that's a smart thing to do when you Hamilton's going to 10 cents. Hamilton petrol's going to be 10 cents dearer than
I think
everywhere else.
Yeah, I think you're bang on the point that Blair raised. So there's a couple of points to consider here. Is the reason we want to go to consultation. We want to test it. So your concerns will be the exact same concerns expressed by a whole lot of other people. Secondly, Blair touched on the point about leakage, and there is the real risk of leakage. Auckland doesn't have as big a leakage issue because it's an entire region that's coming through. But I can see, as happens around countries around the world, is when there's different state taxes in the US, you get a whole lot of businesses built on the state line that have in the lower tax region to encourage people to cross the line. I can almost imagine there'll be a BP service station at Horror on the other side of the district if this goes ahead. So there's other considerations to bear in mind as well. So you're bang on.
I think though, just to comment, if you look from Hamilton to the nearest petrol stations, that they aren't right on the boundary when you look around the city. So
well, no, not now.
Not now, no. So the market may take time to respond, Angela, and I guess to Richard's point, the other councils around us may also look closely at Hamilton and may look to themselves pursue the scheme. So lots of questions, don't have the answers. I think the other thing to comment is that you may see fuel companies increasing their price, but not to the same level as Hamilton, and profiteering a bit more off the back of Hamilton's higher price. But rather than that money going to the council, it would just flow to a higher profit to the fuel company. So it may not necessarily follow that because Hamilton's prices are 10 cents higher, that those just on the boundary are 10 cents lower. They may be 5 cents lower, and 5 cents extra profit is going to the the company. So there's all sorts of interesting market behaviour that could occur as a result of this.
Deputy Mayor Martin.
Just confirm you are having intense parallel discussions, particularly with the two mayors of our Waipara and Waikato, in terms of this proposal.
I have talked to them both.
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Mark.
Thank you. Just following on from Councillor Mallett's question earlier on, can I seek some assurance from you guys that what we take from the ratepayers at the petrol pump is going to be reflected in the rates?
We built our budgets based on the costs of running the city, and that won't be changing. And then that gives us greater flexibility to manage our rates. So the outcome is, yes, it will be, our total revenue won't increase by that. Our total revenue will stay the same, but how we distribute that between rates and fuel tax would change.
Okay.
So, yep, and I think Councillor McPherson responded to your similar question yesterday. Was it's really around this table, but the advocacy from staff will be that it's an offset against rates rather than actually an increase.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, do we have any debate? Councillor Rob.
Councillor Mark Robb.
Look, I think we've been caught napping here. It's time that this council did some fresh thinking. I've raised previously at this forum the Local Government New Zealand funding review of 2015, and this review concluded the present charging of rates on property owners at levels expected to fund and operate cities in the future was not sustainable. And I think when I've read through these 1,000 pages of our long-term plan and what we're expecting ratepayers to pay, and only that group to pay, in increased rates so that we can fund our city, we urgently need to look at other forms of seeking revenue, and I think this local fuel tax is the way to go. If you look around the world, you'll see that generally states are moving away from dependency on progressive income taxes. They are moving towards user pays and indirect taxes, and it's a much fairer and much fairer tax and an easier means for collection. Councillor McPherson gave me some figures, and a 10 cent per litre fuel tax would bring in around about $13 million, which is perhaps midway with Blair's estimate. And to me, that's an equivalent of an 8% rate increase that tax would. And I don't think we should stop there. I think we should be looking at the refund of our GST. GST is collected by the state on our rates. The rates are typically at a tax, and it's an anomaly that we would be paying GST on a tax. So there's $24 million, which would be the equivalent, if I use that 8%, of about a 15% effectively a 15% rate increase. And there's a lot of other user pays taxes which I think this council has from time to time attempted to dodge. So I think this is wake-up call time, and I'm strongly in favour of this advocacy, and this advocacy to be done urgently so that we can actually do something now around this 10-year plan, which the feedback to date has been pretty negative from those around the city. This is a way of dealing with this, and I urge both the Mayor and the Chief Executive to get us on that train, the same train that Auckland's on, to have the tax available from the 1st of July 2018. Thank you.
Councillor Paula.
Thank you, Mayor Andrew. This should not have been dropped in overnight like it was, having said that, or since yesterday. Having said that, because it was discussed at a high level a while ago, and we were aware of some of the things that Auckland were doing. I support this in principle because I do support the idea that we have to look at a range of funding options to fund council's activities. Notwithstanding that, it's mostly the same people, ratepayers and people who buy petrol within the city are largely the same. So we do need to be careful of the ability to pay anyway. What I was going to say is that had this recommendation included the word subject to council endorsement prior to it going out to the public consultation, because look at the date, it's going to come straight into public consultation without us having had the debate first. I'd have been happier if we, as councillors, could get all that information back, have a good look at it, understand where it's going to be spent and why, before we put it out to public consultation. And we will be able to springboard, as the CEO is quite correct, LGNZ are having a conversation about this as a funding tool, and I'd have liked to have been able to see some more feedback from that. I would also like to suggest that the Mayor and the CEO lobby government for more money generally into passenger transport and cycling to enable us to fund those projects that sit within Access Hamilton. We've always struggled. We put in really good bids and we get some work done, but we certainly could do more, and we're now talking about potential rail to Auckland. So let's have a conversation about how the government puts more funding into alternative modes of transport as well. That will take some pressure off the ratepayer.
Councillor Martin, you'll be the last person speaking unless there's somebody else who's speaking against.
In which case, I'm going to yield to our Transport Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Very gracious.
Very gracious. Thank you, Martin. Hey, look, I've got 1.5 feet in Councillor Pascoe's camp here. The half is the universal liking of user pays. I don't think that's always appropriate, but on this case, I think it is very much appropriate. And one of the points that Rob said that's quite important is we've been long looking for alternative sources of revenue. Here's an opportunity being presented to us for that, for a definable area of our work. And we'd be absolutely crazy not to jump at the opportunity. It is only an opportunity at the moment, and we should put our political and bureaucratic efforts into making the opportunity become a reality if we possibly can. I don't think there's any problem at all that it's come in overnight. If an opportunity presents itself, you get more information on it, and that's what staff are responsibly doing. And I think we should continue to do that. Even if we get all of this, it's not going to fund all of our transport costs. Our transport costs are much higher, as has been said, I think, by Blair earlier, in total, than the amount that we would collect. But it is going to fund a significant chunk of them, and I think that's appropriate in this case. It could be called cherry picking, or it was called by an earlier questioner. I don't mind if we cherry pick $100 to $150 million over the next 10 years and use that to fund all the Access Hamilton transport improvements that we've been talking about. I think that's a very, very useful cherry picking, and we'd be irresponsible not to support this and not to try and go down that track. Yes, it's been a little bit late, but our understanding previously was it was an Auckland-specific proposal, and it was only yesterday that politicians in Wellington have made it at least partly clear that it wasn't just available to Aucklanders, it was potentially available to others. So why wouldn't we get involved in that? I think that, no, look, I'll leave it there, thanks.
So we've had 3 speakers speak for the motion. Gary, are you speaking for?
No, I'm for it.
Okay, so we'll go to the vote. All those for? I just did. Sorry, are there any speakers to the contrary? Okay, so all those for? Any against? Carried. Thank you. So now we're going to page 16, item 8.
Just to help me with
yes,
my
I've got that
planning.
written down. So 1:40.
A lunch break at 1:40?
Yeah, we came back at 11:40, so I'm trying to do it in 2-hour chunks. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. That's where we are, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, so Lance, thank you.
Good morning, Mayor Andrew. Good afternoon, as it might be. And councillors, I'm just speaking on behalf of Debbie, who wrote this report, is unable to be here today. So you have the report in front of you, which is around the Richmond Park School issue, and the associated letter that has been written up for your approval. We will take any questions that you have around that. Thank you.
Do we have a mover? Councillor James, a seconder. Councillor Mark. Councillor Siggy.
So much. Look, I just want to ask, it says in the letter that, in the submission, that the council is aware of some initial interest from Tainui about purchasing the land for housing. Since that letter was written, is there any further development in that area, or do you know of anything further that Tainui is interested?
No further information that we have on that at the moment, no.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Ange.
Waiting for debate.
Okay. So we move. Sorry, Councillor Gary.
Can you just be a little more concise about what we want out of it? Because
So-
we're all about not letting them bulldoze things and all that sort of stuff, but then what are we going to do with it?
Well, the report is outlining basically that the community has made it clear that there is a need for community space, and their preference is for that building to remain so that they can have some space for community activities. We're not recommending that council purchase that building though. So we're in a difficult situation where we are basically giving some information to the ministry that if they're going to dispose of those lands, then we would recommend that they have some discussions with the community before they go ahead and do that, because there is some clear desire to keep that building.
Yeah, but does that imply someone in the community, someone in the community will be buying it or leasing it or using it for something? I mean, it's really, what are the community saying?
The community are basically
Bear in mind, the word community is a very
So yeah, we're talking to the people that we've talked to.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they're basically saying that there's a building there that has been used, that they have been leasing that from the ministry, and they would like to continue to be able to lease a building. There isn't a buyer in mind in terms of if the ministry decided to sell that. There isn't a buyer in mind. But their basic concern is that if the building goes, then there is a building that's no longer available for them to use.
Okay, so is there any plan for someone to take it over or someone to maintain it? I mean, obviously the Education or Ministry of Education no longer want it. This is all clearly laid out, and they don't want to fund it and all that sort of stuff. Who would be the person who would be the entity, or what would be the entity that would maintain it, keep it safe, all those sort of things?
There isn't anyone in mind at the moment for that.
So does it just go into limbo?
Well, I guess that's probably where it's been for quite some time, and so the ministry is looking to kind of move on with that. So the community has been using it for quite a while, but the ministry is in a position where they would like to dispose of those buildings. As the report outlines, there has been some issues around safety, and issues around having an empty school in a community. So they're in a situation where they would like to remove it. I think some of the community's concern is that it's been sitting there for a very long time, and the ministry is now ready to go on removing it, and hasn't really had the conversations with them about what the future might look like. So they've just got some concerns that they have been under the impression that there's been a building there that they could use, and now suddenly it's going to be gone.
When you say they, you mean the community has...
Community members, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, because we're not very specific in what we want to happen with it, are we? We're not at all.
It's difficult for us because we're not in a position where we would be recommending to purchase it. So we have limited control over what happens to that building. So the recommendation we're basically making to the ministry is that they have some ongoing conversations with the community before they make a final decision. That's all we can really do.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
We're a third party to this
Yeah.
whole... I understand that.
Yeah.
So I'm just not quite sure what we're trying to do with it. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Dave.
Yeah, look, you're saying building, but it's buildings, is it not?
Correct, yes, sorry, I
Yeah,
am saying.
they've got a
yeah.
number of different ones, and different ones have been used by the community, including one that councils put money into in the past,
Correct.
which is the hall, which one could imagine would be quite useful in a community like that if there was a way of accessing it.
That's the feedback we're receiving, yes, it would still be useful.
Yeah, and there may be some buildings less useful than others, like some of the old classrooms.
I think that's a fair assumption, yes.
Yeah. So if there was a negotiated position with the ministry, it may be that we would say, look, yeah, we understand why some buildings would go, but others need to remain because they're still useful and usable.
Yeah, there's probably a bit of a hierarchy in terms of which buildings are more useful than others, and our position is really that the ministry needs to have those conversations with the users and the community groups as to what is most useful for them.
Yeah. Given that some of our money went into the hall, should we not remain players in the field? I mean, we could, for instance, without putting any capital up, offer to book the hall through our booking facilities, could we not? You know, for the community. I mean, I'm just not, that's one of the suggestions that was made, so I'm not sure why that isn't being considered now.
The conversations that we've had with Te Whare o Te Ata, Te Whare Kōkanga, is that they would be in a position to do that, so it wouldn't necessarily add value to the conversation as a third player, if that was all we could bring to the table.
Yeah, but given that we put money into that, should we not be pushing that and saying we've actually got a bit of a stake in here? We would like you to specifically look at this proposal for the hall. You know, I don't care who books it, so long as the public have availability, and I'm trying to check that we're saying, well, we gave you 40 grand and maybe 2 lots of 40 grand. There was a debate over that. But we at least would like you to think seriously about having it available for the community to be booked by whomever.
I just want to support what Nick's kind of said in terms of we're in a tough situation that the ministry have said they don't have money to continue to invest in the site, and therefore they're looking at the next stage, and therefore our recommendation is that there is still interest in, you know, some elements of it, but we've taken the steer that we would be helping to facilitate the community to have that conversation rather than us being the new owner or administrator of the site.
Sorry, I feel like I'm speaking a different language here. We put money into the darn hall. That's we on behalf of the public in Hamilton. Should we not be able to say we've got a bit of an extra stake there and actually push them in that direction? That's one thing. Two, in case you haven't noticed, there's been a slight change in the political landscape since we first started these discussions. There's a whole new government and a whole new Minister of Education who has been actually changing a number of things in that area, in the education area, that the previous government had. I just can't see why we're not being more proactive in this area. We're not talking, no one's talked around this council about us putting up money to buy anything, but there are, just to do a paper submission and say, oh, well, it's your choice, doesn't seem to cut the mustard, doesn't for me.
Well, we could continue to be facilitators to that conversation going forwards between the ministry and the community groups.
That's a bureaucratic answer if ever there was one.
Well, do elected members, do you have some direction the way you'd want staff to move forward on this?
Well, yeah, and it's been given before, Lance, by the group of councillors that when we specifically raised the point about the having put money into the hall. We raised a suggestion that the groups, there were a number of groups that were looking, for instance, at the bowling club here. They couldn't all fit in there, and we asked if there would be discussions with, you know, whether there could be discussions held with some of them as to whether this Richmond school or some of the buildings there might be a suitable alternative for them. We've sent the letter to Tainui, which was one of the things we sort of asked about, but it's been some time, as we've been told, since that happened, so have we chased them up? The answer seems to be no. I just think we're going through the motions and not sort of following some of those areas up.
Well, I think if you want us to be stronger in that council facilitate the booking and asking the ministry would they not sell it and then keep it available for community use, which I think is what we're hearing the community's telling us. We're happy to add that in. The mechanism for that, as Andy said, is, you know, and you've outlined, is there's a couple of mechanisms that we put into our booking system, or that we get another, if the ministry agreed to that, there's another party could actually do that, so it can still be used for community purposes. I think your point around the money that council's put in previously is a good one, and I think we should probably need to reiterate that again with the ministry. I think, though, the report actually outlines that the ministry have a process around disposal, and at the end of the day, in my understanding from the original agreements and money going from council, is that, you know, they have the ultimate right to make a decision around disposal. So I think it's around how much leverage we have.
Yeah, has anyone thought of going to the new minister's office? I mean, there was a process around paying fees for going to tertiary education in New Zealand, which changed yesterday in a single day because the minister said this is the new policy. You know, has anyone spoken with the minister's office, the new minister's office, for instance?
Well, I'm not sure of that, but
in terms of leverage.
No one's engaged from a leverage point of view with the new government, Councillor McPherson.
But could I just outline that my understanding of MOE policy is that they won't fund maintenance for buildings that aren't used for educational purposes. Now, I think, you know, obviously I think you're right, there's probably potentially a new landscape now. There's an opportunity. I think there has been some change in the ministry over the last few years around flexibility of community facilities as we've found ourselves. So I think it's an area that we could carry on lobbying and leveraging with government officials. So we're happy to do that. I think we do need to respond in writing. If you think we need to beef up our letter, then happy to do that.
I think we also potentially send a letter to the minister as well, if there's a new minister and asks for an opportunity to engage on this particular matter as well.
Yeah, I think it probably needs to be led from a bit higher up.
We're used to...
And questioning happening simultaneously.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you.
I mean, it would be very unusual of us in a meeting to change the wording of a letter to give some direction maybe, but the resolution...
You could possibly add something else to the resolution around what you're talking about, Councillor Dave, about talking to the new government and the minister's office.
Yeah, so maybe a C that the we step up engagement with the Minister of Education in respect of Richmond School and report back to the next council meeting.
Well, that's Lance has made the point that we need to respond in writing, but I think before Christmas was more or less the time, wasn't it? Yeah. So I'm not sure that will get you a response in time. So this is my frustration. Where all of these things have been said before.
It's Dave.
Yeah. When we get to debate, I'll write out a resolution. There's some other questioners.
I wonder if Dave would be happy to defer it until a break so we can...
After lunch?
Yeah, because sorry, that was kind of a procedural point of order. Yeah.
So Dave, have you finished with your questioning?
Yes, I have, and I would
He's got an amendment.
like that opportunity to, over lunch, talk with the other councillors that have been involved and come up with a resolution. So, just on the debate part of it.
Okay, so we'll finish questioning, and then we'll move on to the next paper. So, but we will continue through the questioning side. So when we come back, we'll be straight into the amendment or the motion being withdrawn and the new amendment becoming motion, and we'll go straight into debate. So,
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I do have something I have to duck out, apart from eating, I do have something to duck out for at lunchtime, and I won't therefore be able to raise a question to Dave at that point, so I was next on the question list. May I ask my question?
Yeah, just explained, Paula, we will finish questioning now.
I thought
When we
you
come back after lunch, the amendments will go straight up on the board, we'll go straight into debate.
Right, so my
we're
question is,
we're finishing our questions now.
so I can finish.
So what I meant by finishing is
Fine. I thought you
you
meant
can
I-
continue, sorry.
Thank you,
I
sorry.
I understand.
We're talking at cross purposes.
I can see
yeah.
the confusion.
That's
Yeah.
fine.
We're not
That's-
finishing with questions, we'll finish asking questions.
Finish up the questions.
Sorry.
Thanks. Don't mean to be difficult. I'm just really interested in this, given that, given the huge development that may go into the Peacock area. Can we include in that submission a request that we understand what provisions they're making for future education facilities? Because here is one that's not being used, very old and, you know, possibly not suitable to school standards. But we'd like to have a conversation about that because, you know, a new school will cost a lot of money and there'll be tax on that too. So just want to, I think it's really important that we work together on that. Can that be encapsulated in your drafting, Dave?
Deputy Mayor Martin.
Just a question to do with the no need for further green space. What do you mean by that?
The information from our planning team is that there isn't a need for green space in that, for extra green space in that area at the moment. The community groups consulted with also were in agreement that they were not requiring more green space,
No.
that Melville Park's very close to where the school is. So they were not in favour of removing those buildings and turning it into green space.
No, but you've got an existing playing field there, which has been traditionally open. Melville Primary, of course, fence their school off at the weekends, but that one, you've got an existing playing field which has always been open access. Well, it was when the school was there, obviously. I just need clarification that the word extra versus existing.
Yeah, we're referring to the space that the buildings are currently on, and that if that was to
the
be...
green space around the buildings, the field, the school playing fields, what do we mean by that? What do you mean? I'm not talking about moving the building, you know, getting rid of the buildings for more green space. I'm talking about what you've got, the existing playing field.
I might just refer to Lance, if that's all right. Lance, are you able to give a little bit of clarity around that?
Sorry, can someone clarify the question?
Well, the question is simple, that there's no need for further green space. So if you interpret that by, no, we don't take buildings down to create extra green space, but on the school campus, there is an existing fields, you know, where kids can kick a ball around and run around and even side of a playground, whatever. That's an existing amenity. So we need to be crystal clear what we mean. You know, there's already existing green space in that school campus with all the existing buildings there.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. There isn't any part of of what I'm hearing that green space would be removed, so the playgrounds...
Well, no, because if you sell it and put it all in housing, you lose the green space. Now, I'm not saying you don't have a housing development, but what is crucial, including the hall that Trevor Mallard opened, who was a former education minister, he opened the community hall, that's what Dave's talking about, but the actual, that green space component. Now, that may be integrated into some further development, but it's really important that community amenity surely is retained. And on my argument here, and we can do the detail of the new letter, I think it's a bit vague.
Yep, no, I understand what you're saying.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll defer this item till after lunch. Could I ask Councillor Mark and Councillor James, who moved and seconded this, to also talk with Councillor Dave, who is putting up the amendment, who you may be comfortable to withdraw at that stage, not now, after lunch, depending on if you're comfortable with what Dave's putting up. So you may be comfortable to withdraw your motion. Well, we don't. You won't know till you've seen what he's written up. So, to be fair, okay. Yep. Okay, so we're now moving to item 9. So we're going to 2/3, which is this one here. So I'll start by introducing the item. You're right, Angela?
Sorry, so we're on the, because there's no, the actual book doesn't say on the science item.
So sorry, you're on page 1.
Okay, yep.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, so this has been a really big job putting this budget together. And I particularly want to thank the Chief Executive, Sean. Thank you for the work you've done, David, and just a huge amount of work has gone, and I would be here sometimes till 8 at night, and I'd still be getting emails from these guys at 2 in the morning. And I'd come in the next morning and they'd already be here, and they really looked like tired. And there's a big team of staff in behind them as well. So just it's not words, it's actually budgets as well, and making it all come together. So I particularly want to thank you all, Stephen, Chelsea, the rest of the team. Just huge, guys. Thank you.
Mayor Andrew, thank you for that. There's also, it would be remiss for me to say that the whole organisation, in terms of the development of the asset management plans, activity management plans, the work that's gone on from strategy team and the like, it's really been a team effort. There's been tens and tens and tens of people that have worked really long hours. So wouldn't want to be taking any credit that's not due to me. That this is truly a team effort.
Thank you, and I believe you've done a very good job, so thank you very much. I've built this budget based on a number of key principles. Not funding the city operations from debt, looking after the assets that we have, ensuring growth pays for growth. I have also made it clear we need to manage the challenges of growth. These have always been my views, and I have been supported by resolutions of council. This budget is the outcome of those views and resolutions. The draft budget is bold. It is important that we place all our cards on the table and start from a position of fact and acknowledge all the challenges in front of us. I want to work with my colleagues. This will mean compromise and pragmatism from every elected member, including myself, and may mean that it will mean we are going to make some hard decisions, including cutting costs and reducing investment in infrastructure and possibly amenity. In the council briefings, we haven't signalled and reduced levels of service. This hasn't set us up for an easy start to this process. I have put forward the closure of eyesight as an example of the decisions council should make, and I encourage council to think hard and not shy away from such decisions. The everyday costs to run a city has outstripped the revenue for day-to-day running of the city by $60 million over the last 6 years. Council is now paying $3 million per year just to service that debt overrun. We have an opportunity to balance our books today, and I believe it would be irresponsible not to do so. I do not want to leave this for a future mayor and a future council and future generations to clean up. Hamilton rates are $500 lower than some of our neighbours. And Tauranga, we're $1,000 below Auckland. We have significantly lower rating when you compare ourselves with the other growth metro councils in New Zealand. We just aren't rating enough to run the city properly unless we're prepared to cut services. I don't want to look back, I want to look forward, and this is our chance to put things right. I'm also talking to central government, as you know, about the petrol tax for our roading budget, and should this come through, it will lower the proposed rates increase. So I want to thank you all in anticipation of a constructive discussion to come up with a draft budget for this great city of ours, Hamilton. I'll now hand over to the Chief Executive.
Actually, I'm just going to pass it on through. I was going to thank staff, but there's been enough accolades thrown around, so I'm going to hand straight to Sean.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Worship the Mayor. So, as has been acknowledged, a lot of staff have worked on this report over the past several months. I think it's probably been a couple of hundred people in reality across the business, and it's been the main focus of the business for those months. But there is a lot of content and a lot of moving parts, so we need to acknowledge that that can seem a little bit overwhelming. We've done our best over the past 9 months to break that up into the manageable parts through the briefings and the council meetings that we've had. But this is the first time that it all comes together for the first time. And I guess there's a couple of points I want to stress in that, is that the Mayor has led the process to this point in terms of getting the proposed budget on the table. But I just want to kind of outline sort of where this sits in the process. So from here, the job in front of council today is to approve a draft budget. So that's taking the Mayor's proposal as a starting point, asking questions, debating, negotiating, doing whatever to get to that point of the draft budget. I do want to stress that that is draft. This isn't being locked in stone based on the decisions that you make today. So what happens after we approve the draft budget is that staff prepare a consultation document, and that consultation document is what we use to formally consult with the public. The public have their say. We have hearings and deliberations. Council gets to debate again the budget and the plan, taking into account all of that public feedback. And so I just want to make sure that we understand that by approving a draft budget today, we're not setting that in stone that can't be changed later. But it is important that we do get a draft budget so that we can progress through that, so that we can go out and talk to the public, so we can get their views, and so that their views can then be considered in the plan that we put together. In terms of the report itself and the budget itself and how we plan to work through that today, essentially we're planning to work through the budget in the order of the recommendations in the report. So there are recommendations on page 8 to 13, and so that's also covered in the document that was circulated last night. I think you have been given a copy of this morning as well. So that's the planned meeting order for the 10-year plan, 6th or 7th of December. So if it's helpful, I think I just want to talk through a little bit about that process and how it's planned to work, and make sure that if there are any questions on that, that we understand what's being proposed there. So the first set, or the first discussion, is around the financial context and strategy.
Sorry, just to be clear, Sean, are you now addressing this document here, right?
Yes, I am.
Thank you.
Yep. So that mirrors.
So we just got that this morning. This was on our desks this morning, is that right?
It was, yes, it was circulated by email last night. It also, I spoke to it briefly after the Growth and Infrastructure Committee yesterday.
Okay, thank you.
But it mirrors the recommendations in the report. Yep. So that first section is around financial context and strategy. So David will be talking about that. That includes the forecasting assumptions, the financial strategy measures, so how we're planning to measure the financial strategy in the budget, and we'll be seeking adoption of the recommendations from around A to D at that point. Then we'll move on to and just to be clear, included in that is approving the debt to revenue, maximum debt to revenue limit. That kind of sets the, I guess, the upper limit for what we can fund through the discussions that follow from a capital point of view. Then the next section is working through the operating budget. And I just want to be clear with this piece that when we're talking about the operating budget and the resolution that's being sought around that, it's about the everyday costs. So it's not about the proposals relating to the operating budget. So for example, there's proposals in the report relating to the operating budget around city news, around arts post revenue, those kinds of things. We aren't going to be talking about the proposals at that stage. We'll defer that. We'll talk about the proposals when we get to, we'll talk about all of the proposals together after that.
Sorry, I know it's interrupting the question because I think it's Brendan's point. From what I understood from our discussion, that also means any new proposals that are, say, presently and sitting in that unfunded bucket or unmentioned bucket, those will also, that will also come in at that later time?
That's correct.
Right, thank
Yep.
you.
So just to be clear, so when we get to the conversation around the different proposals, that is where we would, if elected members wanted to introduce other proposals, either ones that have shown as unfunded in the report or anything else that elected members want.
Additional budget or whatever.
Yep, correct.
Whatever. Yeah.
Yep, so that would be the point to introduce those.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
If I may, the operating budget, that means that approving that's item 2, means that we're approving a 15.5% increase in rates.
No, so not approving the rates increase component of that. So it's approving the operating budget, excluding any of the decisions that we make subsequently.
But where is the motion for the 15.5% rate increase? I couldn't find that anywhere, and I just assumed that by approving the operating budget, which of course includes the 15.5, that we were actually then approving that. But I may have misread.
Yeah, so it's a really good question. So on page 13, the recommendation O.
Hang on. Just let me get there. Just let me find. Page 13.
Yep, so page 13, recommendation O at the top of the page.
Yep.
So that follows, so the item 4 on that, the average rates increase to existing ratepayers, that's where the rates increase would be approved as part of that, recommendation.
So.
But I think, excuse me.
So if we approve F first, and then we consider the proposals under N, which, is that one of N? Yeah, it's N. Are we doing one thing before the other?
Yeah, so if I can explain, so under the recommendation in E and F, that's the operating budget.
Yep.
So there's the fees and charges in E, and then in F, it's approving the draft operating budget, excluding consequences of other decisions at this meeting that have an operating budget impact. So that's...
So we should perhaps including rates, including property rates?
If that helps for clarity, that is definitely the intention of that motion.
I'll wait till I get there. Okay. I was quite confused in terms of where it was specific that we were voting for a 15.5% increase. I'll wait till I get there. Sorry to interrupt.
That's all right. I think these are all good questions. This is the point to actually make sure that we kind of do have that understanding.
Councillor Jeff.
Sorry to continue the interruptions. Look, I also just need some clarification, and I was confused in the same way as Rob was. But also, I have some concerns. I just want clarification. The operation budget there, I don't want to be in a position where we're approving that in any shape or form and painting ourselves into a corner if at a later time we realise that the rates are far higher than we want and we want to be pulling things back. So I understood from the process that we weren't actually going to be approving the operating budget early on.
So the plan is that we did approve the operating budget without any of the proposals or the rates component to it. So that essentially the everyday costs of running the city is essentially what we're looking for approval for at that stage, before we move on to the other components of the budget.
So, Sean, just jumping on board. So the operating budget that we're looking to approve is effectively the operating expenditure and the operating revenue. It reflects the principles of that were put forward from the Revenue and Finance and Revenue Task Force of looking after the assets we've got and meeting the cost of growth. So the opportunity is we agree that part of it, there will be a debate about whether or not, and amendments. So the recommendation is we approve that. We fully expect there may well be amendments and some review of those costs at that stage. So while we're saying we're going to approve that budget, that section's coming forward for discussion. Of course, council has every right to pull back expenditure on that, and the budget they sign off as the base may change as a consequence. But that's the stuff that's not discretionary as a proposal, it's discretionary as a level of service. So if council makes a decision not to do that level of service, or not to, let's say the costs have gone up by how many million? 26 million? Yep. So 26 million, if council says, well, that's unacceptable, we only want it to go up by 18 million, specific things need to be identified, and once they've been identified, council then make a decision to adopt the operating budget, having been adjusted for those changes. So we're not saying that so we're calling it signing off the operating budget, but what the operating budget looks like is the discretion of this council.
Okay.
Dave's raising his eyebrows.
So shall we move that to last?
Just still ask some questions.
Move F. I mean, I can see where E is aimed at, but should we move F to last? I mean, I thought, Richard, that the Revenue and Task Force was really around C, and that is, you know, that we balance the books, that we have a debt to revenue ratio, that we, I thought the Revenue Task Force really focused on what we've got there in C.
Yeah, also looking after the assets we had and stuff like that. So that's part of those principles. But I think Dave might provide clarity as well.
I was just on the list, that was all.
Oh, sorry.
But surely the issue is that there will be maybe consequential changes in the operational budgets as a result of other decisions that get made after we have a look at it, provided we can come back to that and correct for the consequences of other decisions?
So yes, you can. What we'd set this up is that there's no for all of the funded and unfunded budget proposals, there's no items in those that will be included in the budget that you're approving from the operating budget.
No, the point being that maybe we want something that's in the capital budget that has some operational consequences, and we decide as a result of putting that in, we can no longer afford to be in an activity or to provide the existing activity, provide the higher level of service. All I'm saying is that we need a chance to align them all after each group of decisions, surely.
Sean?
Yeah, so the idea was that by approving F, which excluded the consequences of everything else, that would provide for that. I understand the point that you're making, though, that if we got through all the proposals and decided we wanted to support a number of proposals, sorry, you wanted to support a number of proposals that had consequential OPEX, you may then want to go and revisit an activity and decide to exclude that. That's
if you could do that, then it wouldn't matter so much the order, presumably.
You comfortable with that as an approach? We can just take F later. James,
sorry,
we can take F later.
What you sort of.
You could always take it later. The point of the budget for staff and preparing it was the complexities around all the variables, and they all impact each other. And so what we're trying to do is create a logic step through with placeholders to say we can go back if there was something that was later decided that was going to change a previous recommendation. So the way F is currently worded is such that, you know, we could get to the end, we could take F in its order and we could approve it subject to any later decisions in the meeting, and then that allows us to go back and do exactly what Councillor Dave was asking for. So I don't think there's any need to get F out of order of the way we're at. Obviously we'll have good questions and answers, but around that operating cost increase, I think fundamentally, and my financial context will speak to it, is that when the Financial Strategy and Revenue Task Force got together, and when we as as staff presented to members of that task force around what should guide the decision making, one of the sort of key guiding financial principles were that we wanted the everyday costs of the city to be funded through the everyday revenues of the city. We also said that we wanted to look after the assets that we've got fundamentally. There are a number of others, obviously, in the report. So what you're looking at in terms of the increase of in the operating budget is around dealing with the challenges we currently have to return to sustainable levels in the organisation, to look after what we've got, and to address some of the new issues that council is facing now in terms of growth. However much we think growth is there, it is impacting on the organisation and has done so over the last few years, putting strain on our existing infrastructure. And latterly, the increase in regulations and compliance around health and safety, which is causing us as an organisation to have to respond to that. So I think it'll be a healthy discussion going through the operating budget. I think that the recommendation allows us to go back, should we get to a place where we think we need to adjust that. So so I would think that we're in a good shape to continue.
I think, to be fair, Councillor Pascoe makes a good point, and notwithstanding what you just said, David, I think we go through the operating budget, we get to the end of it all, and if it's okay, we say, let's use that as the baseline for our calculations,
Yes.
which is the key message that we're trying to achieve, which is almost like a, in principle, agreement, but no resolution. Then we progress through, and if we have to then unwind it and come back, we have that flexibility. So I think what I'm hearing loud and clear from everyone in the room is that the whole thing is going to need a whole lot of work, and let's not cement them into a corner or paint them into a corner, by doing so. So when we get to the end of the operating budget, if there's any known changes through that process that people have got questions on and want to tweak or change in this agreement, we can put that in as a baseline adjustment. Really what we wanted to do is make sure we had the numbers through the modelling that were of a reasonable level of constancy, so that when we do our variable analysis, everyone knows what the baseline's compared to. That's all. That's pretty much the driver for that. No, not trying to preclude decisions. Councillor Leary's got her lips perched for a question.
But you don't need a resolution
No,
to do
that's
that.
what I'm saying. So agreement,
is what you're saying, isn't
agreement
it?
in principle, we don't need to do that.
Because the draft budget is in front of us.
Yep.
And with absolute respect in the work that's gone in here, the Mayor has had a long time to work through this, and we've only had it for the detail for 5 days. So any flexibility that we can have would be greatly appreciated by myself and I'm sure other members. So I think that's a sensible way forward.
200 pages a day to read. Anyway.
Continue, please, Sean.
Thank you. Thank you. So the piece after the operating budget is when we get into the capital program, and the first piece of the capital program is the renewals and the compliance business improvement items. So this is essentially the looking after what we've got stuff, for want of a better phrase. It's a technical term. And the business improvement compliance investment is around what we kind of colloquially call some of those must-do activities as a result of legislation change or things like that. And so again, we'd be seeking adoption of the recommendations around G&H, which are the renewals budget and the compliance and business improvement budget. And we could, yeah, that's that section of the report. Then we move into the growth section. So the growth paper in the report, and those are recommendations I, J, K and L. And again, it's seeking adoption of those resolutions as we go. And then to the transport improvement section, and same again. And then we get to the proposals, and it's probably the proposal section where I just wanted to probably have a little bit more of a conversation, just to explain how this is proposed to work. So reflecting, I think some of the comments that have been made around the table around the operating budget, the idea with these proposals is that we go through each one, and there's the opportunity for elected members to ask questions, have discussion on each, and to have an agreement in principle on them as we go through, as opposed to any kind of binding resolution on each one. The reason for that, similar to the conversation around the operating budget, is that we need to consider all of those as a whole. We don't want to get to, so if we said, for example, you might not want to support the first proposal unless you knew that, you know, the eighth proposal was not going to go ahead or something like that. And equally, we want to understand the cumulative impact of all of those proposals on the financial strategy. So we're not trying, to Richard's point, we're not trying to kind of cement ourselves into a corner where we have to go back and revoke earlier resolutions.
So just to get that clear, Sean, we won't be voting on each of those proposals separately as we work through them?
So the idea is that we would have an agreement in principle on each one. So that would not be a binding vote as such, and then we would come back to that resolution as a whole and vote on that as a whole. So that.
But if you had one of those proposals that you didn't agree with,
yep.
Won't the tendency be to vote against all of the proposals in N, rather than, you know, allow a fair assessment of each of them to be voted on and agreed? You know, let's say if you take the first one, just let me find the first one. What was the first one? Re-imaging, yeah. Yep. So if we took that and we did not have support around the table that it was not approved,
yep.
Would we then take that out and then move on to the next one, so that when we got to the end, proposal 1 wasn't part of the
motion.
Wasn't part of the motion, is it?
So the intent would be that we work through each one of those and we get an agreement in principle or not on that. So if nine councillors said we don't like that proposal, we want it out, we would keep a track of that on the whiteboard as we went. We would keep a running total of what the impact on financial strategy was.
Mm-hmm.
We'd get to the end of all of those proposals, including any new ones that elected members want to bring to the table, and we would, you know, based on that sort of majority vote on each proposal, that would be indicative of the motion that would then come for N. Other elected members could put amendments to N which oppose that, which said, actually, I support the motion, but I actually, you know, I want to take out proposal 5, 6 and 9 or whatever that may be. So you do get to have the questions, discussion on each
and a
one.
vote on each one.
Yeah, so all we're saying is that the vote on each one won't be binding for that same reason, that we don't want to get to a point where we've get through to proposal 12 and we spent all the money, or that we get, you know, or that your support for proposal 5 might be conditional on saving $5 million in proposal 6, for example.
I'm just not sure where we're going to land on this, but anyway, no one knows that. Okay, I understand what you're proposing to do. Okay, thank you.
Yep. So, and David has raised a good point that we have staff available to model the financial impact of those things, so we can take breaks at sort of appropriate points, and when we get through to the end of those proposals, that we've got the CR1 room next door where we can model different combinations of options, etc., if you wish. Okay, so assuming that we get through all of those proposals unscathed.
Thursday next week.
Yep.
Excuse me, keep moving, please.
Yep. So then we move to the financial strategy, and this is where, so at that point we would have understood essentially all of the costs that are being put forward in the budget, and so with the financial strategy, what we're really asking you to approve then is what you want the rates to be. So understanding all of the costs, you would understand what rates would need to be to balance the books from year one, and you don't have to do that, provided that would clearly be the recommendation of staff, is that it's prudent to balance the books. However, at that point you would understand what the financial strategy limits were from a debt point of view, from a debt to revenue perspective were, and understanding the cost would allow you to decide what you wanted the rates increase and the speed of the rates increase to be.
If I can add to that too, Sean. So CR1 will be available when we get into the proposals, because it might be quite complex and we might not be able to deal with it within the room, so we'll be able to break for that. We also will have modelling here in the chamber, so if we're into fine-tuning and wanting to see the impact of that fine-tuning, we'll be able to do that in the chamber live. Real time, should I say.
Okay, and then if I just sort of move on, and then following that, that is essentially the budget, if you like, and then there's some other recommendations around consultation document and engagement, etc., which we will take after all of those other items. So those are the recommendations P to T. From the top? Yep.
From the top.
Sean, keep moving, please.
I'm happy to sort of pause there and just see if there's any questions for clarification.
No, nobody's pushed a button. Can you keep moving?
Okay,
If
then I'll
people
finish.
want questions.
Okay,
they'll
I'll finish then.
Okay, so I'll move on.
Yep.
Thank you.
Take the baton. So one of the things...
Page yet?
No, I'm just
Okay.
verbally giving you
You'll let me know when
an
we're on a
address.
page, eh?
Yes, I will. So I just thought it was a good, or staff thought it was a good opportunity just to provide some financial context. We have had conversations, decent conversations for the last 9 or 10 months. And so having a bit of a recap I thought was a good thing to do. All of you know that putting together the 10-year plan is both a strategic and a financial document, and it's somewhat a roadmap for the next 10 years, as you know. Just to remind us that fundamental in terms of preparing this roadmap, the Local Government Act stands to support us and to direct us, and direct us in such a way that when we come up with our roadmap, it's financially prudent. We also owe it to the community to be financially prudent, and we also owe it to future generations of our city to be financially prudent. There's two key themes here. Firstly, to get to a position where the everyday costs of running the city are covered by the everyday revenues, and largely we do that through rates and fees and charges. The second theme is to focus on repaying debt so that we can create and protect the city's debt capacity. To fund, and this is all about funding our renewals program. It's about funding investments into those core infrastructure and community amenities that we choose to maintain and improve the livability of our city. So just recapping to March, and sorry to take us back there, but the Chief Executive did provide a presentation to elected members in terms of Council's financial outlook. In that presentation, the Chief Executive said that the financial strategy that we had in place was fit for purpose for 2012 and long-term plan and for 2015 long-term plan, but he was concerned that growth and the recent growth and revised projections for future growth of the city presented new and significant funding challenges for Council. And he was concerned as a result of that the financial strategy may no longer be appropriate to guide Council decision makings to face these challenges. So as a result of the presentation on that day, you'll all remember Council resolved to review the current financial strategy in preparation of this 10-year plan, as well as review revenue stream options, including changes to the current rating structure, and report back to Council on the 24th of August. So as a result of that, to perform this piece of work, Councillor Pascoe led the Financial Strategy and Revenue Task Force, and as part of that work, we established the 12 guiding financial principles, which is on page 18 of the agenda, and I know you're all familiar with those. In addition to the task... Pardon?
Yes.
Yeah. In addition to the task force work, the Chief Executive engaged PwC to verify the information he presented on the 7th of March and to provide further analysis relating to the funding challenges highlighted. They were also asked to also assess the appropriateness of the current financial strategy in light of the challenges Council was facing. It's probably worthwhile just outlining the key findings of PwC's report quite quickly, that they confirmed what the Chief Executive had said, in the sense that the financial strategy was appropriate for the 2012 and 2015 long-term plans. And at that time, Council, over that period, reduced debt and reduced deficits. But they also found that Council hasn't been collecting enough in everyday revenue, rates, fees and charges, to fully fund the everyday costs of running the city. At that time, they came up with a number of a deficit of $12 million, which by the end of the last financial year grew to $13.9 million. They also found that growth was actually higher than projected during the 2015 long-term plan, and that forecast capital works needed to be brought forward to meet the challenges of that growth. They also referred to the 2015 and 2045 infrastructure strategy and unfunded strategies and plans to highlight a significant funding gap. So, led by Mayor Andrews, staff have prepared the draft 10-year plan that you've got before you, taking into account those guiding financial principles and the key findings of the PwC report. The Council received a report back from the Financial Strategy and Revenue Task Force on the 24th of August, and they approved a set of working financial strategy measures, and that was important so that we could continue drafting the budget that's before you, and they're on page 17 of the agenda. We reviewed the debt to revenue ratio, which was part of our financial strategy, and we agreed to match the current local government funding authority's definition of debt to revenue, and we did this because of the LGFA being our core lender and making sure we align ourselves with our core lender. We reviewed the balancing the books, the revised measure that PwC put on the table in terms of matching our everyday revenue with our everyday costs, and we also reviewed the other elements of the financial strategy, being the rates increase and total rates limit. The key issues that the 10-year plan needed to address in your agenda, Council's everyday revenue doesn't cover our everyday costs at this point in time. Meeting Hamilton's unprecedented growth requires significant investment. Issue 3 was improving the livability of Hamilton requires significant investment, and the new funding options, we need to look for new funding options to better allocate the cost of growth to the beneficiaries of growth. So what you have on paragraph 102 to 115 outlines the Mayor's draft budget in response to those 4 issues. Staff also prepared in paragraphs 116 to 123 2 alternative options, but there are many others. So that sort of brings me to the end of setting the scene in terms of what has occurred over the last 9 months, what we have discussed as a council. In the agenda outlined is a number of briefings and meetings that have occurred to share information with council, and there's a list of resolutions that relate to the 10-year plan that have been made to support us in putting the draft plan before you. Thanks.
Sean.
So at this point, if there are any questions on that, we're happy to answer those. Otherwise, what we would seek to do is to seek resolution for A, B, C and D in the report. So that's the council receives the report, that we approve the forecasting assumptions, that we approve the financial strategy measures. Sorry, page 8. So page 8 of the big document, the covering report. Recommendations A to D there are receiving the report, approving the forecasting assumptions, approving the financial strategy measures, and approving the maximum debt to revenue ratio of 230%.
If I can just chip in there, Sean, one of the things you'll note if you read the forecasting assumptions is that there are some assumptions in there, like the rates revenue, that may change as a result of this meeting and some decisions that have been made within this meeting. So I've asked the team to prepare an amendment to that recommendation that's on the board now, just to add in terms of the significant forecasting assumptions that those, in approving those, that would be subject to being updated as a consequence of decisions made in this meeting. And there are a number of items that could change. Obviously, items around developed contributions revenue, which is on page 41, paragraph 35, paragraph 39 in terms of the level of rates increase, paragraph 66 that talks about asset sales, paragraph 86 talking about Founders Theatre, and paragraph 105 around shared services for water services. So again, like the previous discussion around operating costs, we understand that we want to, and it's an audit requirement at this stage of the process to approve forecasting assumptions at this part of the process, but to note that not only may they change as a result of decisions of this meeting, but there is every possibility that things will change as we get to February and later in terms of before we finalise the 10-year plan, and as we go through the process we'll update those key forecast assumptions for you.
Okay, so it's moved by myself, seconded by the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Ange.
So we're into questions.
With your leave.
Sure.
During this meeting, in my capacity as the Office of Deputy Mayor, I will be automatically seconding the Mayor's proposals. This means that this is the Mayor's budget, so he's able to get his proposals on the floor of this chamber.
All right.
My individual, just as Gordon would have done for Julie, my individual views, of course, will be reflected in the vote by vote. But it's my intention to second throughout this next day or two all of the Mayor's proposals so that he can actually get it onto the floor of the chamber for democratic discussion. That does not necessarily reflect my individual views on a line-by-line item.
Process, if I might, Leanne. So that's fine. I understand why you want to put that debate up. That seemed, so everything else that other councillors might want to achieve will come as an amendment, and some of them you've already received certain indications, Leanne, from. So at the right time, I want the fair and proper assessment of when those can be put. Is that okay?
That isn't entirely as a matter for the Mayor.
Pardon?
That is entirely a matter for the Mayor as chair of this meeting.
So he can decide in what order amendments are put and so on, and who, is that what you're saying?
Essentially, yes, an amendment is an amendment when there is a mover and a seconder, and it is put and received by the chair of a meeting.
Okay, so I have pre-circulated a couple of, and I've alerted Mayor Andrew last night.
As have a number of elected members.
So all of those will get a fair testing, is what I'm saying.
There are amendments that have been in for a week already, we'll just, until Democracy release the amendments that members have given to them with stipulations for the Mayor not to see them, I can't even consider them, I'm sorry.
There haven't been any with stipulations from me from the Mayor not to see them, but how can recommendations ahead of the report be considered legitimate over other ones? That's not right.
Some amendments have come straight to me, not through Democracy.
For Perhaps this may assist. All of the motions or amendments that have been received by my team relate to proposals in section N. I think you'll find that the process that Sean has outlined is intended to take elected members through a process by which you will be able to ask questions, signal to some extent your intention and the flavour in which you're seeking around individual proposals. You will have the opportunity to ask staff to model and confirm financial implications and other implications of anything you might be considering. And I believe at that point, once we've gone through engaged kind of expressions of interest, if you like, about each of those individual proposals without looking at them as a whole, there will then be an opportunity to break so that those of you who wish to put forward any amendments to the motion that the Mayor is going to put can do so.
And it may be that you get together and you have commonality in what you're putting up. So you could adapt what you're putting up to suit another group who also may, or another person who also may have an amendment. Councillor Ange.
Thank you, Mayor Andrews. So to clarify, I have questions on the assumptions, and that's what this first part of the motion that you're intending does. So this is between, I'll ask Sean's questions between page 8 and page 46, is that correct?
Yeah, but
Sort of information sort of all scattered through that?
sure.
So I'll start on,
Sorry.
no, through from page 8 to 46 are built-in assumptions that this motion addresses. It's all of that information, is that correct?
So the forecasting assumptions are in the attachment, section 1, attachment 2. So that's page 38 to
Yes.
page 38 to 40.
But I have questions on page 8 to 46 of the report. So it's appropriate that I do that now. I'm assuming that it is.
So just if it's relating to items such as the engagement, then we are going to deal with that after we have dealt with the budget items.
Look, I'm trying really hard to follow along, and
Yep.
I'm not dumb. I'm pretty smart, and I've been here for a long time. So I have some questions on page 19. No, thanks, Gary. I have some questions on page 19, which is one of the issues around and assumptions around everyday revenue. I have some questions around the forecasting of assumptions. I have and then I get into operating budget on page 48, but we leave that to the next section.
Okay. Yep.
So,
Yep. Fire away.
all right. So on page 19, under issue 1, Council's everyday revenue is not enough to cover its everyday costs. Can you please explain to me why you've made that statement? Because from 2013 to 16, we reduced debt by $60 million. So can you help me to understand the statement that we have been living off debt?
In answer to that question, we have developed the balancing the books measure, or we have been recommended by PwC to look at our balancing the books measure to not take into account in our everyday revenues items that were not everyday. Examples of that are 65% of development contributions that previously we were taking that in when we calculated whether or not we were balancing the books. The reason why they recommended that was that those development contributions were to fund, to help pay the debt relating to core infrastructure that had previously been implemented for growth sales, and so that's part of our debt repayment, not part of our everyday costs. So that statement in terms of the issue was derived from confirming the fact that our previous balancing the books measure was not entirely picking up all the everyday revenues matching costs. It was being masked by revenue we were receiving that did not relate to our everyday, paying for our everyday costs. They related to capital-related infrastructure.
There's a second part to your question, Councillor Leary, if I may. You mentioned why has debt gone down, I think was part of your question. So basically our from 2012 to 2016, there was a briefing. I gave a briefing twice on this. Unfortunately, I think you weren't there. They're basically debt includes $46 million worth of cumulative deficits from running as a deficit. However, our development contributions and our investment in our capital have generated a larger reduction in deficit. So a true statement is that our debt has gone down, but if we hadn't run at deficits, our debt would have gone down by $46 million more, or actually $60 million more than that. So we have had a reduction down because of our development contributions we've received, but it would have been further down if we hadn't run it in deficits for those periods.
Richard, in the in your pre-election report, and this is where the tension for me is on the proposed rates increase, you said, and that's your report, that's not, there's no political influence there whatsoever. You said that we can maintain a 3.8% rates increase and still deliver a balancing the books, reduced debt and a growth program. Why has that significantly changed this term?
Because we've done a significant amount of work through the growth team and through the infrastructure team. We've got better information around our asset management plans and so forth. Just every piece of information we have now points to the fact that our cost of looking after the assets we've got has gone up, that the level of growth... Sorry, Councillor Pascoe.
Tap, tap, tap.
He's playing Angry Birds. That the cost of maintaining assets we've got have gone up, the cost of growth has gone up. What's happened is there's been increasing pressure on the city because of the growing city in terms of stretching our dollar further, and we're having level of service issues. The level of development contributions have been identified as, whilst reducing our deficits or creating a surplus, we basically have come to the conclusion that we need to make sure that we protect them for investment in future infrastructure as well. So it's a combination of a whole lot of information coming to a head as part of the lead-in. Although we started discussing the 10-year plan with councillors in the beginning of this year, staff started working on the 10-year plan probably October last year, or even further back from that. And this is just information that's come to a head.
I guess my concern is that a pre-election report doesn't really hold much weight then. It's a specific point in time, although the legislation says it's supposed to be reporting on 3 years prior and forecasting 3 years for the future, so there's some concern there for me.
Yeah, the limit, just to put in the context, the pre-election report is a statutory document that's prescriptive in its compilation. We must report against the 10-year plan in the annual report. So it's based on the 10-year plan that exists at a point in time, and the 10-year plan that I was required to report back on was the 2015 10-year plan, which included a definition of balancing the books that I was obliged to follow as well.
The response to, the majority of this response to the budget is about growth. Can you just, someone reconfirm this, maybe Calvin if he's here, or you guys? He is here, he popped up. We grow by 2,200 people a year, is that about right? Is it a bit more than that?
More than that recently. In the last year it was 3,600 in 2015 and around 4,000, rough numbers, in 2016.
And what do you mean by unprecedented growth? Because we've used that language is in here a lot. What's unprecedented
so when
about
we look at, so that's a good question. So when we've looked at our growth is never a straight line. So when we look at our cycles of growth, we're back to our levels. The highest levels we've ever had before, we're at them now, and the difference is we can holding those for a period now of 3 years, whereas before we've only ever held it for 1 year at a time, and then it started to drop. So that's the unprecedented bit. We're at the heights that we've achieved way back in, I've got the graph open in front of me, back in 76, back in 2000 and 2004, but now we're holding that now for a period of more than 1 year, any one time.
And we had the conversation months and months ago. The key drivers of growth are still, I'm just challenging the assumptions, are still population, immigration.
Correct, and also in terms of that a strong economy within the Waikato, particularly Hamilton, so you're getting job growth, the halo effect out of Auckland, affordable housing. So all of those drivers are all considered as part of that. So those assumptions still hold true.
And I'm assuming, because this is such a long process, the 10-year plan, I'm assuming you're tracking business confidence, because there has been a public document released that shows that that's actually had a sharp decline. So I'm assuming as we go through this budget,
Absolutely.
we're keeping an absolute sharp eye on that, because as we know, things go up and down.
Correct. So all of our models take into account that cyclical nature, and that was one of the questions that was asked about Nydia low, and I think that'll probably come up again at some point, but that takes into account there's a difference to Stats New Zealand. Nydia, which is localised, takes the localised cyclical nature of growth, but also we are able to track and look at our economic indicators, which is why we have those. We now have quarterly indicators on both housing supply and demand and the economy. So that's something we've brought about in the last 2 years, to Richard's point before about better data to track that.
Okay, one more question for you, Calvin, because I fear I've exhausted my limit. There is elected members, page 38.7, just on growth again. You said there's a risk that central government may intervene and require council to release more land for development. I'm assuming that's sort of in the context of if we don't go ahead with peacocks. What do you mean by there's a risk that central government may intervene?
So they've already shown that in recent times with the new government, there was, particularly with Minister Twyford, he talked about the inability to provide supply for housing. Now that has been largely in context of Auckland, but clearly the indication here in Hamilton, we've got a supply base. As you know, we've been able to live off the Rototuna investment. We're now suggesting that to continue that investment, we need to open a new cell in the next 10-year period. And so if we weren't to do that, the signals from the Minister was that, well, if government would need to intervene. Now, that could be things like Kiwi build a further type of SH, a special housing area. It could be some direct intervention themselves in terms of building affordable housing. We don't know what that is, but certainly those were the signals. And even from the previous government, the Housing Infrastructure Fund, for example, is a type of intervention, special housing accord, but all those things are interventions to try and push supply.
Okay, thank you. I have a plethora of other questions, but I'm hoping the other members will pick those up for me. Thank you.
Councillor Rob.
Chair, my question also follows on, and I've only got one question, on population growth, and that's paragraph 21 on page 39. When I look at the figures that we got yesterday at the Growth and Infrastructure around our most up-to-date population figure, and I look at the figure projected for 2021, it appears that we're growing at about 29 people per week on average. And then when I look at the 2026 and the 2031, we're projecting for an average of 43 people each week. And I'm really just, and I understand, I mean, I've got these two headlines from Westpac suggesting that migration will be trending down from 70,000 to 40,000 in the next couple of years. Now, and again, these are trends. Economic headwinds set to blow. These are November headlines. I'm just hoping that in terms of our population projections, we've got a reasonable degree of robustness behind the fact that, things do, and I think you've alluded to this, Kelvin, in Angela's questions, that these trends do change, and they can change significantly. And I don't really want to see this city holding some economic babies, if you like, for which there is no demand, and something that we haven't got. Something that we haven't got control over. So I'm questioning here our ability to be nimble and to respond quickly should we move into a recession of some sort, which could, throw the whole tenor of our growth 10-year plan into some economic headaches and financial headaches for those sitting around this table.
And I understand that risk, and I guess the flip side of that same coin is that if with the removal of the LVRs and the New Zealand economy continues to grow, and you have invested in the growth as you've seen in the last 3 years, we've got the ability to cater for that, whereas say perhaps Auckland and Tauranga haven't. So there is that flip side of that. So in terms of the model, and this was the question that was asked, I think, at the briefing we gave, we went back and looked at, so to answer that, the reason we moved to Nydia low, which is above levels we've used before, so no model is perfect, put that out front, but some are less perfect than others. But the model in Nydia low, the reason we've gone there is that it also takes into account, as I said, the historical cycles over time. And the lowest that we've ever had previously was after the 2008 financial crisis, in which was a huge drop to households below 400. But previous to that, our lowest drops had only been in the recent decades to 500 houses. So whilst that's still significant, it's over time, and then it certainly ramps back up. And the time frames are not huge. They're not years and decades. They're literally talking 3 or 4 years. So this general cycle period is about an 8-year period. So the model does take that into account. But the other thing the Nydia model does at the low level takes into account household composition. So as we know, what that means is that rather than just assuming population divided by 2.7 people, here we take a lower threshold, which means to have the same number of people, you actually need more houses, because there is a growing trend in Hamilton towards smaller one-off or two-off, 1 or 2 people per house rather than say 3 or 4. So you need more houses to have the population, and the model takes that into account. So we are confident on that basis.
Yeah, I guess just my concern is that currently we're expecting to grow between now and 2021 by an average of 29 people per week. And yet in the next 10 years after that, we're expecting to grow on average, according to these figures, by an average of 43 per week. And, you know, the numbers are quite significant when it then puts a pressure on housing and car movements and all of the other things. So.
And our new and the idea is that obviously every 3 years we look to be able to revise the model, which then adapts your LTP to that period. So, but the numbers are sound in terms of what we believe we're at now.
Okay.
Can I just interrupt there? Can I just ask the Chair of Growth and Infrastructure if he has any other information on this?
Rob has raised a good point. Yesterday we were told the figures which were produced by Statistics New Zealand, Hamilton's population at the 30th of June just gone was 165,400 people. The growth rate over the last 2 years has been above 2%. Even if we said it's only going to be 2% for the next 5 years going forward, in other words, about 10 to 15% slower than it has been the last 2 years, we'll be at 179,000, I've just calculated, by 2021. So we're significantly higher. Those figures are understated. And it's true that what Rob's saying, the figures that we've saw yesterday are not being matched by this. And this is the same. This is the same. Yeah, but if we don't have, Rob's asking about whether the figures are an accurate forecast
robust
or not.
enough, yeah.
And this is the same issue we had 6 years ago and 3 years ago. And we've always, in recent times, understated that. So if you're basing your assumptions on figures that are not, that our more recent stuff says aren't correct, even if we had 1.5%, we're going to be significantly above what this is saying.
No, and that's a fair call. But however, what we've presented yesterday, and those numbers there, are a point in time as now, as where the model was always, and I know what you're saying, Dave, are we underestimating the demand coming forward and therefore even further in the hole? So we're not further in the hole in terms of supply. Remember, we've got advanced supply because of our rototuna in terms of dwelling numbers, and the number of dwellings there's not a direct correlation between population and housing because of your dwelling makeups localised. Yeah. So that's a good query. The point in time that we pointed yesterday was this is what we've got versus this is what we can project forward, and we're really comfortable that the Nydia does that because that's at the same or higher than what we projected in 2015 LTP, and 2015 LTP was just below our requirements, and of course we're hitting a plateau now, and we do see a softening in that demand, but not to a point where we would be putting under undue stress.
I suppose at the end of the 10-year period, the figures we got here are going to be out by between 10 and 20,000 population. They're going to be understated.
But I don't.
Now we've got someone who wasn't on the question list skewing Rob's questions. Rob Dave's asking some very good questions. He should put his name on the board and ask them at the appropriate time.
I asked Dave, as the Chair of Growth and Infrastructure, if he had any other information to line up with what Rob was saying. So we're back to you now, Rob. None?
Yes, I have.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gary.
Thank you. I've just got a query on the recommendation on page 8 it is. There's a report, that's an easy one. Approves the purposes for developing the consultation, blah, blah, blah. Then we go to C, approves the following financial strategy measures. Okay, the first one is debt to revenue, and then it tells us how it's calculated, which is you go through to paragraph 31 and those things. And it gives us a value. It says the debt to revenue calculated as thus shall be to 220%, 230%, beg your pardon. That's correct, isn't it? That's how I analyse that right. Then it gives us a balance in the books, and then you go to over here and it gives you how to define the things that make up the balance in the books. And that's all cool. Then it says a rates increase limit. I don't know what this is. A rates increase limit expressed as a percentage increase to... There's no value for that. There's no... Because balancing the books means coming to zero. We've got a value for the debt to revenue, that's 230. It doesn't say 3 point... Is there meant to be a 3.8% or a 15.5% or a rates increase limit? What does that mean?
So what that C is asking you to approve is not the actual targets for those measures.
No,
it's the measures
although we
themselves.
have got, sorry, beg your pardon.
Yep. So in D,
Yep.
you're approving the 230%. So you're not approving the 230% as part of that C1. So what you're approving is that these were the financial strategy metrics,
Yep.
which were approved on
Yes.
in August Council as
Yep.
working measures. This is how we're going to define our financial strategy limits. So that's what you're being asked to approve there, is actually those as being the measures of how we're going to measure financial strategy.
And it's helpful that we have got the actual target already been suggested to us for the debt to revenue ratio, which is 230%.
Yep.
So what are the sort of things that, so the rates increase limit
So you will determine
could be the 3.8?
Yep. So you will determine that through through the meeting essentially.
Okay, so what's the rates limit expressed as a maximum portion of rateable value of the city? Is that a legal thing we have to have a limit on, is it?
That's correct.
Yeah.
So currently in the financial strategy, the current financial strategy talks...
And that's something we set?
That is something we set.
I thought, okay.
And it is something that we are required to do. The current one is 0.627% rates. Rates being no more than 6.627% of total capital value of the city.
Okay.
So once we understand the rates increase limit and we understand what our rates take will be, we'll be able to understand that limit more.
Okay. All right. So once we've done C3 or Romans 3, we can then calculate what the impact of that is onto C Romans 4 and determine whether or not we're above our preset limit.
It's somewhat nebulous in the sense that we've never referred to it.
No, I haven't seen it
It's something
before.
that's required by statute, but it doesn't help us.
That was never in our financial strategy previously, has it?
Yes,
was
it's in
it?
there now.
Okay.
It wasn't in our stated financial strategy in the 10-year plan. It was in our financing and funding policy, whatever it's called. It's a subsidiary document. So we had a high-level stated financial strategy, which was about the balanced budget, debt to revenue, and rate certainty.
Okay.
And then we had a legislative document that had the sort of the depth of our financial principles and so forth, which have formed our financing policy, revenue and financing policy.
Okay, I think I get that now. Thank you. And the other thing, and this is, I like Angela, I'm very smart. And you can point her all to me if you like. Angela was talking about the usefulness of this approach, the financial strategy thing, and why didn't it expose things previously? And you're all going to roll your eyes at this one, so start now. To what extent was capital, I mean, it seems to me so blimmin' obvious that we don't say it, that a big part of the reason we were managed to getting these spectacular debt reductions was we never completed our capital program. So roll your eyes.
No. So there is an element that our comparison of our actual debt to the budgeted debt at the end of the period was positive due to the fact we haven't completed our capital program.
Yeah.
So there's other components.
And adding to that, back in those days, we took all of our development levies as revenue. Now we're not. We're only taking 35% of it as revenue.
Yes.
And the rest we're going to put as a creditor, a liability.
We're not going to treat it as a liability.
No,
we're going to
okay, but we should do somewhere on the line. We should do that, shouldn't we? Because in actual fact, we've taken money from someone not for a service we've provided, but for a promise that we will provide some facilities later in the future.
That was my eye rolling.
Yeah.
So firstly, you're right about the capital program stuff, but we pretty much spend the budgeted amount, but it's always a bit of last year's, and we defer a bit of next year's. So there's that argument.
Yeah, but that's really imprecise. You know, the fact that, in fact, we're not. I mean, this year's carryovers have got stuff back 2 or 3 years. It's not just last year.
So there is an element of stuff. There is an element of capital program that's deferred that contributes to our positive position against debt, right? That's fine. So,
I'm just concerned, Richard, that we're still not seeming to address this carryover thing, and I just wonder if it's one of the issues that has you're not confused, but one of the things that has hidden the hidden the the failure in our financial strategy.
It has probably contributed to the fact that Councillor Ange's point, the fact that why has debt still gone down if we're actually not running the city in black. So
I can understand why Angela finds it difficult to believe that we're running the city on debt.
I'm agreeing with you. It is a component.
Yeah.
Right. But the other component to it is the fact that new properties coming to the city every year come on board effectively majority at land value, and rates at land value aren't high enough to cover the cost of the additional services they receive. Rates at capital value would be. So there's factors, as we've grown, we're actually contributing to the deficit as well. So there's a whole lot of factors, and we could spend quite a long time explaining all the different factors, but principally so. Debt has gone down because of our capital program, not delivering all of it, so I'll give you that. Gone down because we've sold some assets. It has gone down because we've collected development contributions. We're now correctly saying need to be spent on future assets. It's gone down because we've generated a cash flow for the depreciation that we have collected net of any deficits, but we haven't necessarily spent all the renewals money yet as well. So there's a whole lot of contributing factors to that.
Given the capital expenditure under achievement is generally pretty material. You know, it's between the $15 and $20 million sort of. Should we factor it into this? Because I consider anything we've received from development contributions for a project that we don't complete it in the year we got the development contribution generates for us an obligation to, in the future, provide that asset. No. We don't show that on our balance sheet anywhere.
No, every year we basically refresh our development contributions model, so we know exactly what is outstanding and owing on a particular project, what we said we're going to do and we haven't done. It's only recognised as a liability legislatively and from an accounting point of view if we make a decision as a council not to progress.
And I understand that, but in terms of the fact that if we collect $100 million with if we get
25 million.
If $25 million in development contributions, but we only do $20 million worth of our capital projects, that $5 million immediately, correctly reduces our debt because it's cash in our bank account that reduces our debt. But we don't acknowledge that we owe someone $5 million worth of pools or parks or libraries.
No, but we, in our capital program, we will talk about the fact we haven't delivered on it, so we reflect our commitment through a narrative. The other aspect that we want to do is not necessarily talking about the development contribution fund portion of it, but you'll see the recommendations in regards to the renewals program. We want to move to a more portfolio approach so that we can manage our total capital program.
And we've discussed this.
And our debt as well to make sure that we address that somewhat. We can never get it perfectly, and I think...
No, I'm not expecting us to get it perfect, but I do expect us to report it more accurately.
Yeah, and I think we do report the fact we do talk in our 10-year plan about significant variance, our annual report about significant variances. We do bring it up at all the finance committees and so forth, so it does get a degree of visibility. And the challenge is that, for the most part, a program, and you've seen that from the finance report, the projects not delivered have a third-party influence behind it as well.
Yeah, I'm not asking for justification that we're not doing it. I don't care. Well, I do care about that, but that's not the issue. I just don't think we're reporting it properly.
Yep, and we'll take that on board. That's simple.
Thank you.
I'll unroll my eye. You can roll your eyes now.
Okay,
Roll your eyes.
I just don't think that
We use up to
councillors
3
are
minutes,
getting the
haven't we?
full package when we're relying on these financial strategies to tell us where we are. I don't think it picks that up. And I'm a long time since I was an accountant. But
on that point, it does pick it up in that we adjust our capital program in the 10-year plan for all the uncompleted projects from the previous year going into it. So whatever we tell you is the debt capacity reflects that. If we had to spend $20 million on something, that $20 million is debt capacity because we've factored those projects in. So the model accounts for that. So you're not going to double, because your concern is...
But our balance sheet doesn't show it, does it?
No, but the balance sheet that's driving the 10-year plan does, because we account for that in terms of our estimates. So that there's no...
But our annual balance sheet that we report on...
Not our annual report, but the 10-year plan budgeted balance sheet will reflect, or the models reflect, the fact that there's been an underspend on capital because we've deferred some projects.
I just think we perhaps could have found this issue out earlier if our reporting had been a bit more concise. And like I say, Rob's a better accountant than I am, but
he's rolling his eyes.
Okay, Gary.
Okay, sorry. I just think it's to me it really concerns me that we are going to make the same mistake again.
Yep.
Because
Chief Executive, you've got that.
Yeah.
Yep, I have.
Okay,
and I'll
thank
just
you.
text these guys.
Councillor Paula.
Right, I'm going to stick to some questions. I've just got a couple of short ones, but they sort of link. Firstly, because no wonder the general public are bamboozled by all this, to be quite honest. Looking at page 16 under the financial review strategy and paragraph 20, by adopting and working to this strategy, you're talking about the previous council strategy, council has improved its financial position significantly. You're referring to from a debt point of view, are you?
Yes, that's
Only.
correct.
Because obviously sustainability, if we're putting up 15.5% rates, you might say something else. But so it's just referring to the debt, that was a very competent strategy to manage debt.
The premise behind the 2012 and 2015 10-year plan was debt reduction.
Debt reduction.
Because it was about building capacity for investment and growth, because the challenge that we've always had...
That leads to my next question. So building the capacity for debt funding, other things, and most of that's going to go for growth in this proposed budget. Most of that debt capacity, if not all of it, goes towards growth projects.
Yes.
Right,
well,
thank you.
it's... Yes.
You said many times to us in the first giddy 3 months that we had trying to get our head around this new reality that development contributions were never anything else.
That's correct.
So how does this fit with the council not appropriately funding the deficit over a period of time? How was that not foreseen or noticed?
I don't understand the question.
Well, you would have been looking beyond the DCs to see what else was going on, and you would have, because you say a couple of sentences like councillors were notified that budgets might need to be reinstated, that you spoke to them about some of the programs being a big pushback, and they might need more money for renewals and maintenance. So somebody must have been aware that you were drawing a very fine line in terms of the future, or creating a bow wave of cost in the future.
Yep. So a couple of there's multiple dimensions to that. So firstly, the council in 2012 and 2015 did adopt a financial strategy and various metrics to support it, and it was appropriate at the time. That's been validated externally. The second part about it is the council in 2012 and 2015 made a deliberate decision to not invest in certain renewals and to be as lean as possible we don't mean in the context of still maintaining assets, in terms of maintaining our asset base. And it was deliberately, and I would call it an austerity budget. It was in the middle of the GFC. There was challenges to maintain our rates at a certain level, and consequences and decisions were made. There were a number of unfunded programs, and that was a deliberate discussion. and that was made with the community as well as with
And
big
so
members.
was debt deficits a deliberate decision of council at that time as well?
Yes, they did. They had a, based on the measure of balanced budgets at the time, they had deficits for 4 years of that 2012 10-year plan.
So that was all known previously and reported to the public accordingly, I would imagine?
Based on the definition of balanced budget.
Okay, just a couple of other shorties, if that's okay. I was interested in the statement on page 25, paragraph 93. While investment in community infrastructure and transport improvement is seen as adding to the livability of the city, it's often treated as a discretionary cost. Is that how this council has seen that area of spend?
I think that's a generic statement.
It sort of it references the
It's there,
it references the 2015 10-year plan, and there was a statement to that effect in the 2015 plan that really prioritised investment in infrastructure over amenity projects. That's where that's taken from.
So there again, I'm just trying to get at, that was a deliberate strategy of council to
Absolutely.
make much more discretionary decisions around what went into community.
So it was explicit in the 2015 10-year plan.
Okay,
consultation document.
so it was known and should have been, could have been foreseen. And so now we've got this perfect storm of huge growth, deferred maintenance and renewals, some of the projects that were delayed coming on stream, amongst other things, and then the higher costs of things like earthquake proofing and all of those compliance issues around water, and that's what's brought us here now. This is what
There's another aspect too, is yes, and there's a little bit of complexity in there as well, in terms there's some deferred maintenance, there's some deferred renewals, but in New Zealand there's pretty much every council's facing the same challenge with the age of their assets. Pretty much, given the nature of the government funding going back in the 1950s, 60s and 70s, where the government put a big, huge rollout of capital across the country, a lot of councils built their infrastructure with either 100%, 50% or some contribution from central government. So they're pretty much all the same age. And that's a perfect storm, and then the entire country's confronted with a whole lot of renewals, even from a regional council point of view in terms of some of their infrastructure as well. It's a significant challenge.
absolutely, and they've been planning for that for some while with flood assets and things like that, because they've known that they're at the end of their useful life. Just one final question. Key point on page 24 is the key points bullet points, the middle one. Conversely, doing nothing will see a deterioration in livability as population outstrips amenity investment, and staff do not see this as a feasible option. So I just want to ask, do you believe then, having made that clear statement, which I accept, that there is enough money in this proposed budget to address the amenity investment that a really good city needs?
I think that's probably...
excuse me, that's not a question for staff.
Why not?
That is the question for this table to decide whether they want to increase rates to increase amenity or not. And that's exactly what we're here for today.
Thank you, Mayor Andrew. Respectfully, I'll disagree, because I do think we should take staff's guidance around where they feel there's high need, medium need, low need for community or transport infrastructure. They're experts. I rely and I respect staff for their expertise, and I think that's appropriate sometimes to ask them where they feel that sits. That's my personal view anyway.
Okay, so we're in debate. Is there any debate? Okay, we'll put the motion. All those. We have debates. Councillor Paula.
With all due respect, though, it's 2 o'clock and I haven't eaten for hours, and I could probably make a really bad decision in a rush, or we could have a little break, please.
Yeah, we'll just keep moving. We'll go to debate, please.
Councillors, anybody else?
Councillor Paula, you're on debate.
Okay, so no, it's.
Sorry, just to be clear, for exactly what are we? So we're debating page 8. It was up on the board here, sorry. So it's exactly what's on the board or on your screens.
So this is not the 15.5%. We're not.
No, just to be very clear.
This is none of the measures. No. This is kind of the
framework.
Yep.
Framework.
Yep.
A to D.
It's on your screens here.
Yeah, A to D.
And yeah.
Oh, look.
And it has the red writing here, subject to being updated as a consequence of decisions at this meeting. So that's your protection.
I'll make a few comments in debate. I'll probably, since this is a moving feast all day, and therefore we're not bound by any particular thing, it's understandable why the public have some anxiety about what's coming up. They did not see this coming. A lot of the assumptions that we're talking about today, I don't think the public clearly understood, or the mechanisms that brought us to this particular time. And the rates increase that we're proposing is just far too high in one hit when you're taking people by surprise. There's elements of it I approve of, and there are still some ins and outs to be debated that I'm quite keen to explore, and I'll signal it nice and early. From my last question, you can deduce that I'm interested in the community amenities and facilities and whether they're properly taken care of. But in respect to that, I'll leave my discussion till further on in the agenda.
Councillor Dove.
Yes, I'm going to vote for this because it's not the final cut, but I don't agree with the forecasting assumptions in the growth population area. I think they're significantly low. I think if we grew, I've just calculated, in fact, if we grew at the same rate as last year, which wasn't the fastest growth year in terms of population, the figure at the end of the LTP period would be about 25,000 population too low. Now, if we grew at half that rate, it'd still be too low. We're going to grow at more than half that rate. So I think some work needs to be done on some of the ones going forward. For the next 3 years, it's not going to make much difference. We're going to be able to, the capacity we've got is going to be able to handle it. But that's going to get less and less, that balance that we've got, the free load we've got as the LTP period goes on. And that's what got us in trouble 6 years ago with the calculations, in my opinion.
Councillor Robb.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Look, I support the motion because I think it brings an agreed certainty to the table around a number of financial strategy measures. Personally, I don't agree with all of them, but I think that we have been through a process over the last 6 months where we all had an opportunity to see an external advisor give us information on what might be appropriate measures, and for us to debate and digest and take these on boards. Look, we can have measures for Africa. I think the last lot of measures that we had were appropriate for the time that we were in. I certainly won't take any criticism that they weren't the right measures that we had. I agree with Dave on the population. I kind of think the other way. I think that we've been through periods like we did in 2008 where our population projections were mindfully overstated, and we'll beg to differ on this, but at the end of the day no one will know who's right until the dates have occurred. The one area that I do support though, and this is for Hamilton as a growing city, I think we're growing up now in D, and we're accepting that we need to have debt levels of around 230% of our revenue. I think we've been apologetic, I think, for the last 6 years, having rolled out of the V8s and some pretty bad decisions. I think we're in a much more robust place as a group of councillors and as a group of senior management that we can actually move ahead and make some good decisions around what we should be borrowing money for, given the growth path of the city. So if there's one that I really support, apart from A, is D, and I've got no concerns over that. So I'll be supporting the motion.
We've had 3 consecutive speakers speaking for the motion. Is there anyone who would like to speak against? Okay, we'll put the vote. All those for? Any against? Thank you. Just before we break for lunch, we'll be back at 2:30. The democracy manager is just... Sorry. The democracy manager's got something to... Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I think just ahead of the lunch break, it might be helpful for me just to step over a couple of things related to standing orders and amendments, just so that everybody's clear, and I'm available to have any further conversations you might have. A motion is a motion when it is put to the floor and when it has a mover and a seconder. Once a motion has been put, an amendment is able to be entertained at that point, and it is an amendment when there is a mover and a seconder. It is essentially at elected members' discretion in terms of timing about when they signal an amendment or indeed a motion. Mayor Andrew has made it clear he intends to put the motion, and he has a seconder for the proposals in this report. So the opportunity in front of you is to think about when you may wish to put an amendment. The second thing that's important to remember is that in debate on either a motion and or an amendment, you may foreshadow an amendment in the event that the one that is being considered is lost, or indeed an additional motion, but we won't go there right now. You do not need a seconder at that point. However, if the amendment is lost and you get the opportunity to put yours, you will need a seconder at that time. Your seconder must not have spoken in the debate. Okay, so there's just a few bits and pieces to think about then in terms of understanding when to signal what your intention is. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so we'll come back at 2:45, quarter to 3. Thank you.